The 4-speed automatic gearbox 4 HP22 was developed from the 3-speed automatic gearbox 3 HP22 with which you are familiar. New details: the converter lock-up clutch, hydraulic locking of all gears against incorrect engagement, and the additional 4th gear as an overdrive. Before we go into further details, first a few notes about the program. Firstly, we'll explain the construction of the gearbox, and you'll be able to get to know all the parts at the same time. And then we'll explain the repair procedures in detail. So then, let's start with the construction of the gearbox. In the converter housing, the torque converter is a sealed unit. The torque converter contains the turbine, the impeller, the stator, and the converter lock-up clutch. And now the oil pump driven at the engine speed. Firstly then, in the gearbox housing, the drive shaft, cylinder A and piston A, the diaphragm spring, steel and lined plates A, the lined plate carrier A, the clutch housing A, this is also the drive for clutch B, steel and lined plates B, diaphragm spring, piston B, and cylinder B. From clutch A and B to clutch pack C', C, and D. Assembly. Cylinder and piston C', the diaphragm spring, steel and lined plates C', second gear one-way clutch, steel and lined plates C, diaphragm spring, piston C, cylinder C and D, piston D, diaphragm spring, steel and lined plates D, and also the locking ring. The drive sun gear, front planet gear carrier, one-way clutch D, the locking ring, the annular drive gear, the rear planet gear carrier, annular drive gear, drive shaft. From clutch pack C, C', and D, and planet gear set, to clutches E and F, with the 4th gear planet gear set. Sun gear, planet gear carrier, annular drive gear with one-way clutch, steel and lined plates E, piston and cylinder E, steel and lined plates F, and piston and cylinder F. And now the centrifugal governor. and in the sump, the control unit. The gearbox is mounted with the special bracket to the repair stand. The retaining bolts must only be lightly tightened, otherwise the gearbox housing will distort. Remove the torque converter using the special tool. The gearbox is arranged vertically so that the converter housing can be removed together with the intermediate plate. Remove the angle plate, axial bearing and thrust washer. The drive shaft can now be removed together with clutch A. Now, remove the plate carrier for clutch A together with the angle plate, axial bearing and thrust washer. Remove the circlip and pull off clutch B using 2 extractor hooks. Remove the washer and sealing ring. Loosen the bolts and remove the oil sump. And now, the oil strainer. Now, loosen the Torx bolts in the valve body using the bolt head insert, but only loosen the 12 mm head size bolts. Remove the valve body. Remove the locking rings and compression springs. Using the extractor, pull out the 8 sealing sleeves. Remove the locking plate and then, using the special tool, loosen the collar nut. When loosening the collar nut, the drive flange is held by the locking spanner. The gearbox rear housing can now be pulled off. And now the parking lock wheel and centrifugal governor. Then the parking lock pawl, the lever spring and the pivot bolt. Place the assembly sleeve on the drive shaft and lock into position with the collar nut. All the Torx bolts can now be removed. Remove the circlip and place the special tool on the intermediate shaft. Clutch C-, C, D and the front planet gear set can now be removed complete. The next stage here is also the angle plate, axial bearing and thrust washer. Finally, the 4th gear planet gear set together with clutch E and F. remove the bolts and the oil pump. When assembling, always ensure that the two dots on the inner wheel and the dot on the outer wheel point upward. Both faces must be flat relative to each other. Clutch A. Press out the drive shaft. The clutch pack is now pressed together, the circlip removed, and the clutch housing removed. The next step is the diaphragm spring and the steel and lined plates. The piston for clutch A is pressed out by the action of compressed air in the oil drilling. The sealing rings are also replaced. The piston and cylinder can now be reassembled and the diaphragm spring placed in position with the dished side downwards. This is the assembly order of the clutch plates: spring plate, steel plate, lined plate. The following applies generally. Always fit the same number of plates as were removed. The final plate is always a spring plate. Fit the circlip. Fit a new seal before pressing the drive shaft into position. And then the following. The angle plate is fitted to the drive shaft, the thrust washer and the axial bearing to the plate carrier. And now, whilst turning, fit the plate carrier. Clutch B. Firstly, remove the spring clip and then withdraw the steel and lined plates. Place the special tool in position. The following can be removed: circlip, locking plate, diaphragm spring. The piston for clutch B was also pressed out by applying compressed air to the oil drilling. Replace the sealing rings. Press the piston into the cylinder. Then, fit the diaphragm spring, locking plate and circlip. And now the steel and lined plates. The end plate is fitted with the ground side towards the lined plate. Fit the circlip. The clutch C', C and D, and also the double planet gear set are placed in a tube. Remove the special tool. The following are now removed: piston and cylinder C', then the steel and lined plates C', the plate carrier and the second gear one-way clutch, and also the steel and line plates clutch C. Now remove the locking ring and the plates clutch D, and then the spacer ring and the planet gear set. You're already familiar with this procedure. Fit the spacer ring. Before fitting the plates, the planet gear set with the first gear one-way clutch must be fitted to the cylinder hub. And now fit the steel and line plates alternately. Then also here the end plate and the locking ring. Plate carrier and one-way clutch, then the steel and line plates, clutch C. The end plate must be fitted so that the center tooth of the 3 teeth fits into the cylinder recess. And now, alternately, the steel and line plates for clutch C'. When fitting the steel plates, the outer toothing must not engage in the chamfered recess of the cylinder. And now, finally, the piston and cylinder for clutch C'. Finally, refit the special tool. Now remove the sun gear and planet carrier and also the angle plate, the axial bearing and thrust washer. And now remove the assembly sleeve. The following parts can be extracted: the drive shaft with the one-way clutch and annular gear. And then the following: the axial bearing and both angle plates, which are made from steel and copper. Clutch E with the thrust washer. The clutch pack is located in the output housing. It can be withdrawn after first removing the circlip. The diaphragm spring is pressed downwards using the special tool. The split retaining ring and the pressure plate can now be removed. The piston E is once again forced out by compressed air. The sealing rings must also be replaced. Assembly now takes place in the reverse order. Alternately refit the steel and line plates, and then finally the end plate with the internal toothing and the locking ring. Remove the circlip and then remove the clutch pack. The diaphragm spring is pressed down using the special tool so that the split retaining ring can be removed. Piston F can be pressed out of the cylinder using two suitable sized mandrels. Replace the sealing rings. After complete reassembly, refit alternately the steel and line plates and also the end plate. Replace the circlip. The one-way clutch can be removed after first removing the circlip, drive shaft and plate carrier. And now carefully remove the one-way clutch cage from the outer ring. When removing, the rollers can possibly spring out of the cage. During reassembly, the one-way clutch cage must be exactly aligned and rotated until the cage flange edge has engaged in the locking recess of the outer ring. The one-way clutch outer ring is now rotated together with the plate carrier in a clockwise direction and fitted to the inner ring. The clearance between the one-way clutch inner and outer rings must be at least 0.1 millimeters. Fit the following to the one-way clutch: the steel angle plate, the copper angle plate, the axial bearing and the thrust washer. And now fit cylinder E to the drive shaft. When fitted, it must make contact with the copper angle plate. When the drive shaft is held stationary, it must turn freely in a clockwise direction and lock in an anti-clockwise direction. Finally, whilst rotating, cylinders E and F can be refitted to the drive shaft. The collar on the drive shaft must protrude by approximately 10 millimeters. The assembly sleeve is refitted for subsequent assembly work. And now fit the thrust washer and axial bearing. Fit the angle plate to the planet gear set. And then, finally, the sun gear. Remove the centrifugal governor. When fitting, make sure that the governor plunger and governor sleeve move freely. Assembly commences with the refitting of the clutch pack and the fourth gear planet gear set. When fitting, the oil feed holes must be aligned to the drillings in the housing. The clutch pack E and F are secured into position using a socket and a torque spanner. Place the gearbox vertically and then fit in the following order: the thrust washer, the axial bearing, and the angle plate with the collar upwards. And then the complete clutch pack D, C and C'. Here also the 4 oil feed holes must be aligned with the drillings in the housing. Remove the special tool and fit the circlip. Remove the assembly sleeve. The next stage is the centrifugal governor with the parking lock wheel. The sealing ring was lubricated with ATF oil. And now the parking lock pawl, return spring and locking pawl. Now stick a new seal into position and fit the gearbox rear housing. Place the drive flange into position and tighten the collar nut using the special tool. Finally, secure the locking plate into the groove. The following parts are now fitted: the 8 sealing sleeves, the compression springs with the locking rings. The longer springs must be fitted to the rear end. The valve body can now be fitted. When fitting, the selector plunger must be located on the actuating finger. And now loosely screw the valve body into position and align using the gauge. The valve body bolts can now be tightened to the correct torque. The sealing ring can now be fitted between the valve body and oil strainer, and the oil strainer tightened into position. Fit to seal. Locate the magnets. The 2 retaining brackets with the straight legs must be fitted to the straight side of the oil sump. Torque tighten the oil sump bolts. Press in clutch B up to the stop. The next parts are the seal, support thrust washer and the circlip. Whilst rotating, fit clutch A. Arrange the gearbox vertically. And now place the angle plate in position with the collar facing upwards, then fit the axial bearing, the thrust washer and the seal. Now fit the intermediate plate and the converter housing. The drive shaft end float should be measured using a clock gauge. When the drive shaft is pulled, the end float should be between 0.2 and 0.4 millimeters. If the end float is outside of the stated range, the converter housing must be removed and the thrust washer changed as necessary. Now there is only the torque converter, and then, once again, the gearbox is fully assembled.